Hey everybody, this is a much different video than usual. This time I'm not going to be talking about retro gaming or CRTs or anything like that. I'm talking about my weekly workflow for how I shoot and edit my videos. Because a lot of people who follow this channel are fellow creators, and they might either get some tips out of this, or some of the more seasoned expert creators might have some tips for me on how to streamline it. So this video is probably not going to be for everybody. Feel free to just not watch it at all, but if you want to know how I do the weekly stuff, definitely check this out. And please, I really am interested in reading your comments on this one. Even if it's, you're dumb, why do you do it that way? That's fine, but maybe just throw a little more in as to how I could do this better. But let's jump in and show you how I do my weekly workflow and let you all rate it. So to start, here is how I shoot each of the individual segments in the weekly roundup as well as the weekly Q&As. I have an OBS window that has my audio interface connected, my Motu M4, and then I just swing my mic around, which is on a stand connected to my desk, so I just swing it in front of me. I position it as close to my face as possible and centered without it being in frame, and that's it for the audio. I do all processing later, which I'll show you. That might not be the right way to do it, but we could talk about that later. And for video, I have my Panasonic Lumix GH5 going with its HDMI output into my capture card, which I just added to OBS to this scene. But I also have the USB cable going, so I could now make any changes that I need right from the Panasonic software. So white balance, ISO, focus, any of that stuff goes right through here. And I think that makes it super efficient because all I really have to do is lean over and power on the camera, reach over and kind of hit the button and back when it asks if I want to be in PC mode, and then just center the camera to make sure that it's still on me and it's not flopped over to the other side of the room. And that's it. I never have to touch the camera again until I power it off. Whereas any other method, I would really have to interact with it. So being able to use the PC for focus and settings and white balance just makes my life so much easier. Only downside is the very rare moment that I want autofocus, I have to reach around and grab the camera, which is kind of precarious because anybody who's seen my room tour video knows that that is standing on a small mic stand on top of a roll of CDs balanced on a window ledge. So not exactly the safest thing to be fumbling around with, but that's basically it. And then I will hit record and record an opening and also at the end an outro with just me in the frame like this. And that's also how I record the me shots in my fancier videos. I just do it in 4K, but I still do it directly on the computer. And then I open up another scene that I created that's basically the exact same thing, except I have a Firefox window that's also open. And then I just stretched it to the size of the screen, and I kind of made it so that it's about the right size so that you don't see any of the stuff that's on the right toolbar of the website, but you could kind of have it centered so I'm standing next to it. And then I record each section exactly like this, which I find super handy because that way if I'm talking about something, if I make a mistake in a 2 or 3 minute section, I just delete it and start over and don't really have to worry about fumbling through and rewatching every 40 minutes of a 40-minute podcast to edit out whenever I made a mistake or anything like that. So I think this is a pretty efficient way to get it done. I think it looks okay. It's not the fanciest, but being able to record this quickly and then just have each file numbered, in sequential order so that I know where everything went makes it so much easier to get this stuff done just because of the overall efficiency of it. So while I would love to hear your opinions if you think I could do any of this better, I have a feeling this is about as streamlined as it could possibly get just because everything is already here. There's no editing, adding stuff afterwards unless I want to edit like a swear emoji on my face or something like that. But I think this is pretty efficient. But the next section is where I would love to hear your opinions. So let's move on to how I do the editing of all of this stuff. So after all the recording's done, I open up a Premiere session, and there really isn't anything special about this. All I did was create a session that has my weekly intro and a title card, and that's it. And there's really nothing at all custom about this. So all I would then do is just create my title, center it, and then go in and drop in all of the videos for that section. This is kind of a weird thing in Premiere where it kind of pauses and freezes for a minute while you do that. I don't know if Resolve has something as easy to drag and drop. Please let me know, because I've tried Resolve so many times. So then I kind of line it up and I just try to figure out where the music ends versus where my voice starts. So a little too much of a delay, so I kind of just line it up. Go a little further. All right, maybe a hair back. And then I just line this all up. And then here's something that I could not figure out how to do in DaVinci Resolve that I love about Premiere. Control A to select everything. Hold down Shift and select the title stuff, which I don't want. And I go into Video Transitions, hit Wipe, right-click on Wipe, and hit Select as Default. Then Control D as in dog. It gives me an error, but it always works. And then I go and I set Film Dissolve back to default, because that's what I like to use for my stuff, and drop it in for the opening. So now I have the opening lined up. The levels aren't correct, we'll get back to that, but perfect, good fade in. So then I'll go over to the effects, which is the only other thing that I do in these so-called templates that aren't templates, is I already add all of the files, and that way each week I could just copy and paste the weekly section Premiere project. I hit down arrow to skip to the next section, zoom in, and then I add that weekly transition of, the cartoon me running across the screen, and I kind of just center it. I could obsess over this, but really it's close enough. You could kind of see it drag behind a bit. So I try to make it basically as good as I can, and just kind of have it slightly askew to the left. And I just hit down arrow to scroll through all of these things and kind of just aim it up. And this is so efficient here, right? I just selected all, added the transition to all of them just with a button combo, and now I'm just hitting down arrow and dragging these down and creating the transitions for each section in like a second each. Absolutely no issue whatsoever here. At the end of this, I will delete the transition, kind of back out for a bit, and I will add the outro, which we're not going to be lining up until later, but I'll have the outro here, I'll have the outro soundtrack here. So now we have the whole file. Next, I want to process the audio. So I will single out the audio track, and I don't know why I select all. I think that's just out of habit, but Control A, then Control M, and I will select Format, Waveform Audio, and let this go. And this next section, I'm going to do this in real time so you can see how I kind of got my groove on, because I kind of like doing it this way. But I hit Export, and then I open up Isotope RX, and I also open up Adobe Audition, and then I get Isotope ready, and then I wait until I see the Premiere file going across here, meaning that it is fully exported. Usually is a little quicker than this, probably because I have this recording in the background, but as soon as the green disappears and as soon as the size appears over here in the isotope window, we're done. So I double click on this, I move everything over and highlight the last part, because the very last section I always leave dead noise at the end, and then I click Learn to try to learn the noise reduction pattern. And I select all and hit Render, and this will take the whole file and try to remove the noise based on whatever it found at the very end. Isotope does this the best that I've found, but I bet you there's a way more efficient way to do this, so really hoping that you all could point it out for me. After that, I then have a normalize function that I hit render on. And all of these things you set up the first time you use Isotope, and then they kind of pop up automatically next time. Then I go to File, Save As, and I just IZ for Isotope, go into Audition, open it up. By the time it's open, it's already there usually. If not, you probably just saw the file change at the very last second. And then I have broadcast compression, which is effects, amplitude and compression, multi-brand compressor, but I have it set as a favorite. If you know of anyone in Isotope to save me this trouble, please let me know, but I think this does a great job, at least for my voice. So I run this. As it's running, I go back into Isotope, File, Close All Files, close out of it, and then I still have a few seconds to kill here. And then File, Export, File, and then the last few locations are here, so I'm able to just do it that way. I always have it the same frequency as input, mono, because it doesn't really matter, and 16-bit, because I don't think that matters for this. Then I close out, save changes, no. And now I mute the main track rather than solo it so that the original unprocessed track has nothing on it. And then I'll just go over and grab the file that it just exported and drag it into here. And now is when I just do some of the audio leveling and checking. So this end one is pretty obvious because you just want it to be quiet. So I will lower that very low so it doesn't blow people's eardrums out, and just make sure that it's all still lined up correctly.
Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.
Not really, so I gotta move this over just a hair.
And I'll see you next week.
Cool. Depending on what I'm doing and when I'm doing it, I'll also take the time to just go in and drop an exponential crossfade so any audio interference disappears after the final transition pops over. And then I'll do the same at the very beginning. I will arrow back to the front, pull this all the way over, and just in case there's some background noise, I'll add the exponential fade right up to my voice. And here is where I edit the intro audio, which I get wrong a lot, so please, any tips here, but I'll have it play, and then I'll have my voice play.
Q&As, I just wanted to shout out.
So that's hanging out at about 6, so I try to make this just under that.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As.
And I'll listen and make sure maybe I'll turn this down just a hair more or something. But my theory is if the intro music is a little bit louder than me, fine. People just have to turn up the volume a bit. But if the intro music is a little quieter and they turn up their volume and here's me blaring through your speakers or your headphones after, not good. So after that, I'll just export, except the video I'm doing right now is actually the weekly Q&A. So I don't need any of the intros and outros. So I'm just going to delete that and make sure all of this lines up. The only difference would be that I would leave it in for the weekly roundup and not for the Q&As. Deleting the outro here. And since there's no outro, I usually just do a fade out on both audio and video. So film dissolve here. And see how that looks.
And I'll see you next week.
Yeah, still a bit of a creepy hangout at the end, so I will cut some of that out, edit the audio, and try it again.
And I'll see you next week.
Cool. Now, here's the part that is also kind of interesting. I add timestamps to everything. So I drag one window over to the left, one window over to the right, and I already have like a template for how I do each of the weeklies. And then I'll just arrow through, and this allows me two things. First, I could do the timestamps, so this is 0021, but it also allows me to verify that I've added the correct wipe and transition to each section. So I'm just gonna add the times for all of these. And the other thing I really like about this is it also allows me to verify each section. So if I'm right now at the next section and I see 3912 and I have it labeled DE10 and then my file name is labeled Mr., it all lines up. But this is how I catch that sometimes I miss files in this and how I've caught a lot of deleted stuff and stuff out of order. So this helps me kind of fix everything. So when that's done, I just double check that everything else is there. I hit the back arrow over enter to do full screen. And now here's something that I would love a better way to do this. I stole this idea from John Linneman, but I export everything Apple ProRes. And I'm going to be sending it to a spare NVMe drive I keep in this computer that I only use to render to, both to speed up the process, but also because this is going to result in over a 100 gigabyte file. Now, that file is going to be deleted the moment that we're done with this process, but you need speed and space in order to do this. So why would I want to do this? Because the end goal is to have the smallest file possible that's as high quality as possible, and certainly a type of quality that no one's going to notice with a streaming video service like YouTube. So let's jump into the next step, Handbrake, but I'll check in after that just to kind of give it more perspective as to why I'm going through all this. So after it exports into ProRes, I just close out Premiere, I open up Handbrake, I open up the file that it created, and I set the preview window to nothing. I don't know if that actually does anything, but then I just go into the audio bitrate, set that to 320, and I use a preset here that John Linneman had helped me out with years ago, where it's basically you just allow it up to 4K and you have very little compression, 20 constant quality and H.264, and that's it. And then I just basically save it into the folder that I would need to, and that's really it. And then I let it encode, and it usually takes about 20 minutes for that to work. So just to try the alternative, let me do the same thing, Control A, Control M, but let me go to a preset. Let's see more presets and see what we have here. Do they have one for YouTube? YouTube 1080p full HD. So let's try this H.264 format and see what happens. But I've tried all of these. I've tried manual settings. I've tried just about anything that you could imagine. And let's check out the difference in quality as well as size, and also the time that it takes to do this, because the other one's going to be 20 minutes to render and then probably another 20 minutes to compress, whereas this one is looking like only 13-ish minutes to do all of that at the same time. So let me just pause for a second to explain why I showed two different methods of rendering. The first method, first with ProRes, then with Handbrake, is what I do for the conversational podcasts and the 2 weeklies, because as I'll show in a moment, the quality is the same or almost exactly the same, but the file size is a lot smaller. But since it takes a lot longer to render and compress, that's something to consider in your workflow. But for me personally, I have already watched those. I've already done those interviews, so I know what I said in them, and I've taken notes if I needed to edit anything, which I almost never do. And then for the other 2 weeklies, I watch back each individual section after I've recorded them. So now I don't need to rewatch the entire video when I'm done, unless I wake up the next morning and want to double check I didn't say anything stupid or anything like that. But for the most part, once I'm done editing, I just click a button and then kind of do other things, work on the thumbnail or whatever as those are going, and then that's it. But for videos like this, I need to render and then watch the whole thing start to finish each time to make sure that I didn't make any mistakes or no new mistakes popped up, even though if I only fixed 1 or 2 things. And I'll often want to do that on YouTube because YouTube often breaks some stuff in these videos. So I want a process that is much faster. And since I don't do nearly as many of these as the other videos, having a much larger file size isn't as big of a deal. I will note, though, that depending on the content, file size sometimes doesn't really matter, because videos like this where I'm just talking to the camera and showing screenshots tend to compress very well, whereas videos with full screen video game footage scaled to 4K with lots of colors on the screen, those don't compress as well anyway, so I'd be going through all that trouble for something that ends up just being about the same file size. But anyway, let me just jump back in so you can get an idea of full time and how much the size difference actually makes, and we'll just pick up right where we left off after Handbrake stopped compressing the file, the ProRes file that we exported. Okay, so Handbrake just finished, and total time was about 45 minutes from the Premiere export to QuickTime, and then Handbrake compressing it, and that ended up in a 1.21 gigabyte file, whereas the direct output, which was only 15 minutes, so much faster, ended up in a 5 gigabyte file. So let's just kind of take a pause here and let's just zoom in. We're going to go for 20 minutes and 30 seconds, and let's zoom in on the text for both of these and see if we could get a difference. We're going to be looking at the still text, so it doesn't need to be exactly the same, but here we go. We have the same section up, and now let's just open both of these in Paint and double check and see. Maybe I could just do a better zoom here for everybody watching, but I'm going to take a look at them side by side and see if I could tell any difference whatsoever. And I know this is very subjective, right? But so is a video that's just me talking to a camera. So they look basically the same. I mean, I can't really tell a difference between the two. The logos, the text, everything else. I think maybe the bigger file has a little bit more defined text in it or something, but honestly, if space is ever a factor for your setup, this has got to be something that you have to consider. And I save every single video that I make, so 2 files a week, 10 gigabytes versus 2.5 gigabytes, that will add up really, really, really quickly. So let me see if I could even zoom in. Yeah, I mean, we're looking at apples to apples here, and I can't tell a difference. So I think if time isn't a factor, I still like the other method, but I would love a way to cut down this export process so Premiere just exports in 15 minutes. Or if even Premiere would script this to go automatically, that means I could kick it off and then walk away. So overall, I'm still going to stick with this until somebody could figure out a way for me to get a smaller file that's equal quality, like we see here. But until then, I think I'm going to do this. All right, so I am so curious to read your comments as to what you all think. Is my audio workflow okay? Can I do it all within either Premiere or Resolve, whatever video editing program? Or do you all still suggest I export a wave first and then do it in iZotope? Or even more importantly, is there a good, easy to figure out compression plugin in iZotope that sounds like the one from Adobe Audition, which I think is a really big help? Also, are there any other noise canceling things that I could use? Because I do use the repair function of audio sometimes to lower extra noise, extra ambient background noise or stuff like that. But is there any better audio workflow? Can I do all of the same stuff I did in Premiere in Resolve? I've tried so many times and it never works out. There's always some bump in the road where I have to manually do something that is super easy in Premiere but takes forever in Resolve. And of course, lastly, what do you all think about my export process? Can I speed that up while keeping the file size small? So anyway, really looking forward to seeing what all of you have to say about this. And if you're a new creator, maybe I was able to give you some tips that could help things out a bit. But thank you all for watching. Of course, thanks for all supporters who support on all major platforms or just use Amazon and eBay links to buy the same stuff you were going to buy anyway at the same price, but we all get a cut. So thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.